stories, and now we're talking about 5 stories, which, right? is
That's correct.
actually supposed to be. So I saw all the information that you sent, but I guess in the end, so staff or RPA is good with allowing 6 stories at this location, thinking that it's going to blend and.
So I'll summarize. I think I had mentioned one of the comments in the staff report was that we were recommending that form-based code zone with 6 stories because that is what is due east of the, that's the nearest form-based code due east of the Old Jotty Bridge. And then that would have a transition to using that zone west of Old Jotty Bridge. I think that probably summarizes it best. And just to share with other council members, we did a map showing the maximum height allowed on the south side and the north side of the river in that location. On the north side of the river, the nearest form-based code zone allows a max of 6 stories. On the south side, there's a little bit more variation. There's maximum, the lowest maximum height is 5 stories, and then 6 stories, 75 feet, and on up from there. So I would say the written documentation, which is where we're saying extending and maintaining conformity with that 6-story riverfront zone just east of the Old Jotty, because we don't have a plan that recommends a height and says makes a decision on a case-by-case basis in this area. That's probably what we would default to is our main recommendation.
But this one would be conditioned to the 5-story.
It would be conditioned. So the
R-
zone
RV6.
on the map, right, would be the R or RV6, but it would be conditioned to 5 stories, yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Councilman, does that help?
Yeah.
Thank you, Karen. You might want to stay at the podium just for a moment. Moving down the list of planning and zoning items, item I was mentioned in committee last week. This is in my district. The community that we were working with, or the applicant we were working with, and the community did finalize over the weekend the conditions for this. Everyone, I did hear from both sides, and they were very pleased of the outcome. So what you see tonight, if I can ask someone to move for an alternate version, that would be great, because that is the version that has the combined conditions. Alternate version. Yes, sir. Do you have, hit your light for me, Councilman?
I was going to, as chair, you could request the clerk to read the alternate version. Then that way a motion is simply made on the alternate version.
Yes, sir. Okay.
Okay.
We might do it that way too. Thank you. Any other items in planning and zoning we need to cover that were not, questions that were not covered in committee last week? Okay, then we will move on into, that's a lot of pages. Parks and Public Works, I believe under Public Works and Transportation, items W, X, and Y were also covered. Does anyone have any questions on those items? Seeing none. Resolutions under Council Office. Madam Clerk, would you read 7A, please?
A resolution confirming the appointment of Mashiba Smith to the Board of Sign Appeals for District 8 with a term expiration of May 10, 2025.
Very good. Councilwoman Knoll, this is from your district, if you have any comments.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I do. Spoke with Smith, and I am thankful that she is willing.
Very
So, yes, make a motion to approve.
Yeah, we'll do that at 6
I?
o'clock.
Oh, okay.
Yes, ma'am. But thank you for
Thank you.
working hard to find someone to fill that position. I know it can be difficult. We will move on to education and innovation under early learning. Madam Clerk, 7E, please.
A resolution to provide longer services for 16 children through a collaboration with Hope City Academy in the amount of $36,094.72.
We did cover this in previous meetings. I'm seeing any questions? None. Moving on under human resources. Items F and G, I believe. Let's go ahead and read those into the record, Karen.
A resolution authorizing the appointment of Ariel Soriano as Special Police Officer Unarmed for the Land Development Office to do special duty as prescribed herein, subject to certain conditions. G, a resolution authorizing the appointment of Jamie Evers as Special Police Officer Unarmed for the Land Development Office to do special duty as prescribed herein, subject to certain conditions.
Thank you. Under planning, item H. You would read that for me?
A resolution approving a special exceptions permit for a new liquor store at 804 Riverfront Parkway, Suite 110, tax map number 135NB007.01C126.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Under Parks and Public Works, we have items I, J, K, L, M, and O, which we did cover in committee. Any questions on those items? Seeing none, if you'll look at your purchases that were circulated this week and let me know if you have any questions for purchase items. If not, we will move to the May 17th agenda. If you'll take a look at next week. And seeing no questions on our May 17th agenda, future considerations, our three-week outlook. I am seeing no questions. But here. Very good. All right. Well, that takes us now to the most exciting part of our afternoon. And I would like to bid a very warm welcome to Mayor Tim Kelly. And then I will turn the dais over to our council chair, Dr. Carol Burrs. Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Ledford. And good afternoon to the entire council and everybody here today. It's a pleasure to be with you. We've accomplished a lot in our first year. Hello,
Hi.
Chairwoman. How are you?
Fine.
And
Go
we've-
ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Good. Have you got any comments before I launch into this, or?
Just as introductory for the record again, and that is that if you know this today, we're making our budget presentation. The mayor followed by our chief financial officer on Zoom. It's also the budget is going up on the web, so we're all seeing it for the first time together. And we will make a presentation today. Mr. Goldberg and we all have agreed, no questions today. That starts next week. You'll have a week to get yourselves together. All the questions, respectfully, we're asking that they be asked in public and answered in public. And so next week, we will start at 10 in the morning, and we will go from 10 to 3:30. The following week, the same thing, and have a complete education on both the operating budget, the capital budget, including special funds. So everything will be in the open. And again, we ask that we're not going to create some secret list on the among us where we ask and answer in writing and the general public doesn't get to see all that. So if you would respect that, I would really appreciate it. And with that, thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. Please continue.
Thank you, Councilwoman. And again, it's a pleasure to be with you today. We've accomplished a lot, as I said, in my first year. Seems like, a week or two, but it's been a year, as you know, and that is thanks in no small part to your partnership and your support and your leadership. So thank you first. Quick recap of the first year. We launched the Community Forward Schools program with Hamilton County Schools, and we funded a new construction workforce center in East Chattanooga, which of course will be opening later this year. We devoted an unprecedented amount of funding towards our city's infrastructure. And yes, we filled a hell of a lot of potholes. By the latest count, Public Works has repaired or resurfaced 269,710 square feet of asphalt road since July 2021. And our teams have filled over 9,000 cracks and divots and potholes. We've paved more lane miles this year than any time in our city's history. And we also importantly took critical steps to bring our employees' salaries up to market rate, which has allowed us to recruit and retain top talent in positions that have remained vacant or were revolving doors. And we've had great success doing that largely, and thanks to Mandy. So we're glad to have her as well. And that sets us up for success in years to come. In summary, year one was really just about righting the ship, and year two is full steam ahead. We've spent the better part of the past year deploying the One Chattanooga strategic plan, and I'm excited to share with you today some of the critical investments we're making to help Chattanooga live up to its potential to be the best city in America, which is a city that works for everybody in Chattanooga. While we're optimistic about the future and proud of the progress made over the past year, we recognize there's much more to be done to confront the critical challenges that face Chattanooga. Persistent poverty, gaps in educational opportunities and achievement, health disparities, gun violence, increasingly unaffordable housing, neglected infrastructure, and a shortage of opportunities for good-paying jobs, as well as a shortage of qualified people to fill the good-paying jobs we do have, are but a few of the challenges we face here. Together, however, we can tackle these challenges one by one with vision, strategy, and leadership. To be successful, we have to be intentional about how we invest our limited resources. Sometimes we have to make hard choices, but we are prioritizing the things that matter most for our community as a whole. We've prepared a fiscally sound budget with no tax increase that provides unprecedented investments in areas that have for too long been neglected. So now let's talk about what we're going to do. First, we're making an unprecedented $33 million investment to seed a $100 million affordable housing initiative that will aggressively seek to preserve or create thousands of units of affordable housing over the course of the next 5 years. In the coming months, we'll be releasing a bold and aggressive and much more specific plan. This budget also includes $10 million for repaving roads as part of the commitment I made last year to invest at least $40 million over 4 years for repaving roads throughout the city. We're making significant investments in sewer and stormwater infrastructure as well to ensure that we meet our commitments related to the consent decree and hopefully wrap it up early, maybe even, but also to ensure that we have the infrastructure needed for housing and economic development. Along with the county, we're preparing a 110-acre site at Enterprise South Industrial Park that has the potential to lure another major auto manufacturer or electric battery manufacturer, along with hundreds or more likely thousands of good-paying jobs. As the need for pandemic response decreases, resources in our Office of Community Health are going to be shifted to address racial and socioeconomic disparities in public health outcomes, as well as prevention of violence in our community. Gun violence is a public health crisis in our community, unfortunately, and this budget expands resources for the Office of Community Health to partner with the Chattanooga Police Department to prevent gun violence, including the addition of a Director of Community Safety and Gun Violence Prevention. Next, this budget includes multiple investments to help streamline city processes and prioritize innovative approaches to public services, from codes enforcement to garbage collection to adding capacity in our permitting offices. Seventh, finally, and very importantly, we're continuing to invest in our first responders and essential workers by providing a cost of living adjustment of 3% with no increase in health insurance rates. We're also providing supplemental funds to Head Start for the first time in history in order to fully implement the $15.45 minimum wage and address pay compression issues throughout the Head Start program. This budget includes some bold investments, and we must continue to be bold and aggressive as we implement the One Chattanooga strategic plan. Very frankly, we can't afford not to. After all the hard and sometimes thankless work of the past year, I'm excited about the possibilities of what we'll accomplish over the next year. And I'm asking you to support this budget so we can get to work. Thank you for your time, and I will now turn it over to your favorite bean counter, Mr. Brent Goldberg, to provide more details via our video link. Let's hope it's working. And thank you
Thank
again.
you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Brent, are you ready to go?
I'm ready, Madam
he
Chairwoman.
is. Good. Okay, you're on.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. Can you see it okay?
Yes.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you for letting me join you virtually this afternoon, and thank you to Mayor Kelly for a fantastic introduction. And before I get going, I see our budget staff has joined us in the assembly room, and if you would allow me, I would like to ask them to stand just so they can be recognized for the tremendous amount of work that they've done in the past few months to get us to where we are today. So thank you all very much. This is an amazing group, and they've worked their tails off to make sure we get through not only budget preparation, but doing that in conjunction with implementing a brand new Oracle ERP system. So thank you all very much. All right, let's get into some of the details. So before we jump into budget details, I want to make my computer work first. There we go. I want to mention, just take a moment to mention the One Chattanooga strategic plan. This is a broad vision that guides the work for all departments. It's systems focused and built on the basics. And one important thing to remember is that it's not a finished product. It's in constant review. And it includes 11 principles firmly woven into the plan. And the reason we talk about vision and principles first is because, as Peter Drucker once said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So this is really important that we keep in mind that we have a strategic plan to guide what we are doing, and it drives everything we do throughout government, including the budget process. As you all know, there are 7 goals and 40 priorities. You can see the 7 goals on your screen. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read through all of these, but I did just want to take a moment to mention that this is what drives everything we do, including the budget process. So as Mayor Kelly mentioned, we have some significant challenges facing our community, from the deterioration of roads and bridges to infrastructure needs, gun violence, and especially increasingly unaffordable housing. And I want to take a moment just to expand on the housing issue that we face in our community. As of 2019, 47% of households in Chattanooga were renters. This compares to 34% in Tennessee and 36% in the United States. So you can see it's quite a bit more in Chattanooga than the peer state in national statistics. Monthly median rent in Chattanooga increased from $495 per month in 2000 to $859 in 2019. This is an increase of 79%, which outpaced the increase in median income for the same period, which was 55%. And now today, monthly median rent is well over $1,000 per month, and income is just not keeping up with the increase in housing cost. The median housing prices have increased 80.7% since 2015, and this leaves 43% of renters defined as housing burdened, and 22% of renters are housing insecure. So as Mayor Kelly mentioned, we have several key investments in this budget to address some of these challenges. Affordable housing, as Mayor Kelly mentioned, we will put an unprecedented $33 million into a $100 million initiative to preserve or create thousands of units of affordable housing over 5 years. We've already began working with partners in the nonprofit, philanthropic, financial, and home building sectors to assemble remaining funds. And any successful affordable housing plan will have a multi-pronged approach. As Mayor Kelly mentioned, we will have a more defined and detailed plan coming out in the coming months. But the plan will include things such as direct subsidies, gap financing, land acquisition, down payment assistance, and partnerships with community development financial institutions. This budget also funds a chief housing officer to lead this urgent work and to pioneer innovative approaches in affordable housing. This budget invests $131 million for roads and critical infrastructure, $10 million for paving, which is part of Mayor Kelly's commitment to provide $40 million over 4 years for repaving our roads, which is a level we've never seen before. It also includes $11 million for road construction, sidewalks, and bridges. It includes 2 full-time employees to drive and operate pothole repair equipment. As the mayor mentioned, we've made a lot of progress filling over 9,000 potholes and cracks, but there's still more to do. This budget also includes $3 million for traffic signal synchronization and optimization, as well as $100 million for sewer projects and $10 million for stormwater projects. For economic development, we have the investment at Enterprise South that the mayor mentioned, which is a wonderful partnership with the city and county that goes back to prior to Volkswagen coming online. And then we also are including $5 million for the historic renovation of the 100-year-old Tivoli Theater. This will create a premier performing arts center that provides equitable and economic impact in the heart of our city. And this commitment is in lieu of providing $1 million per year for 5 years, which was previously included in the capital improvement plan. And then finally, under economic development, this budget funds a director of entrepreneurship. And this will allow the city to have the capacity to focus on creating pathways to entrepreneurship and access to capital for all. For community health and gun violence prevention, our Office of Community Health has led the response to COVID and any public health issue that we have in our city over the past year. And as that need declines, hopefully sooner than later, we can start distributing resources to address racial and socioeconomic disparities in public health outcomes. As the mayor mentioned, we know that gun violence is a public health crisis in our city. And the Office of Community Health will partner with CPD to prevent gun violence through innovative approaches. This includes having a director of community safety and gun violence prevention to lead the work modeled after other cities where this work has been successful, tying together our crisis intervention teams, violence interruption programs, and youth mentorship programs. Pay for first responders and essential workers is something that Mayor Kelly has invested heavily in starting on day one of his term in office. So last year we invested more than $30 million to increase pay for first responders and essential workers. We know that we have to continue investing each year to make sure that we don't fall behind again like we did. So this budget includes a 3% pay increase for all regular full-time and part-time employees. This brings the city minimum wage up to $15.45 per hour, and it includes sworn employees for a cost of living adjustment for the first time in 8 years. So I think including the sworn employees in this cost of living adjustment will prevent us from falling so far behind like they were at the beginning of last year. And then, as the mayor mentioned, no health insurance increases for employees. And this budget includes, for the first time ever, supplemental funds for Head Start to make sure that we can have a $15.45 minimum wage for Head Start and address pay compression issues. And then finally, this budget includes multiple investments to help streamline city processes and prioritize innovation throughout the city, from codes inspectors to demolition specialists to increasing funds for debris removal, cleanup, and demolition, which are all things that we have heard from council members to address. We also are adding 2 garbage truck collection routes. And in the land development office, we have new positions for transportation review specialist, plans review specialist, and construction inspector. All of these things are meant to help us improve our processes and be more efficient and responsive to everyone throughout the city. And then this budget includes a $500,000 innovation fund. This fund will allow us to put money into new ideas, to experiment, to maybe even sometimes fail forward. You know, if we want to improve processes and do things differently and be as responsive and effective as possible, we have to have the funding and the opportunities to try new ideas and see if they work. And if they don't, we need to try again until we find the right answer. So this budget includes some funding for this. And finally, I want to touch on the Chattanooga Improves program that we've implemented throughout the city. This is a framework where the executive team as well and department administrators meet regularly to provide accountability, to do data review, and to overall just make sure that we're accomplishing the One Chattanooga vision that we've set forth in the strategic plan. So those are some of the key investments included in the budget. And next we'll talk about how we pay for these. First of all, when we look at revenues, our general fund revenues are set at $317 million in this proposed budget. Last year it was $302 million, so that's an increase of about $15 million. And we're doing this with no tax increase. The property taxes represent 59% of our budget, and the property taxes included in the proposed budget is a very small, less than 2% increase over prior year, and that just represents natural growth of the property tax base. Sales taxes continue to be strong, and we are budgeting sales taxes at a level that's equal to the amount we expect to collect for fiscal year 22 with no growth. That's, you know, the best way to be conservative is to to budget what we know we're collecting because we don't know what's going to happen with sales taxes as it is much more volatile than property taxes. Overall, you can see that local sales taxes and property taxes make up 79% of our budget. And then on this screen, you can see when we combine state and local sales taxes with property taxes, it is well over 80% of our budget. And other local taxes and other revenues make up the difference. Next, we'll talk about general fund expenditures. This chart shows us how we have proposed the expenditures by department. You can see that police, fire, and public works make up 58% of the budget. Police is the largest at 27%, followed by fire and public works at 19 and 12% of the budget. Debt service and general government make up about 6% of the budget each. Information technology, parks and outdoors make up 5% each. And then quasi-agencies, which includes CARTA, RPA, and the library, is 4% of our budget. Community development is also 4%. Finance and the executive branch each make up 2% of the budget, along with CARTA making up 2%. And then all other departments combined equals 6% of the budget. So that is a simple breakdown of how we have allocated the funds by department in this proposed budget. And this chart actually shows us a little bit different view of expenditures. Instead of by department, this is by expenditure type. You can see that nearly 80% of our budget goes towards salaries and benefits and services. And then the remaining portions go to debt service, vehicle operating expense. You can see 5% total goes to library, CARTA, and RPA. And then everything else makes up the remaining 6% of the budget. Next, we'll talk about the other funds included in the budgets. General fund is our primary fund that we talk about because it funds most of the general operations of government. But we have several other funds that are significant. You can see on the screen that from the Municipal Golf Course Fund to the Economic Development Fund. We have a State Street Aid Fund. And the budget documents provide small summaries of what each one of these funds, the purpose of each one of these funds. Hotel motel tax, the Tennessee Valley Regional Communications Fund. You can see the debt service fund is 24 million. Interceptor Sewer System Fund is our second largest fund at 107 million. And then we have solid waste for all funds combined. The capital projects fund. The revenue for all funds combined is just under $525 million. Those expenditures are just over $550 million. The difference is planned use of fund balance, primarily for the sewer system and water quality. And then next, we'll get into the capital budget summary. We have three different capital funds: general government, and then the Interceptor Sewer Capital Fund. You can see the amounts for each one of those. And just as a comparison, last year, the general government capital budget was set at $57 million. So we have nearly doubled that this year with this budget. The water quality and sewer funds are somewhat similar to last year in terms of the amount. For the general government capital budget, you can see here that the housing initiative takes up 34% of our capital budget, with $33 million going to that. 20 million of that is funded through reserves due to sound fiscal management and making sure that we are as conservative as possible with our estimates and also spending as little as possible throughout the year. And 13 million comes from our ARP funds, combining together for 33 million. You can see that this capital budget includes almost $23 million for roads and bridges. We know that making sure that we invest in our critical infrastructure is important, not only to you all, but to all the residents of Chattanooga. And then you can see the other categories from public safety to economic development, down to neighborhoods, better government, and transit. So in total, the general government capital budget is over $96 million, funding 43 different projects. And then I don't have detail in this presentation for the sewer and the water quality capital funds, but those are included in the budget documents. So speaking of budget documents, the budget books have been delivered to the council office while we were while I was talking or while the mayor was talking. So those are all available for you all to have. Also, all the contents of the budget books are available online on the city's website. And just a quick rundown of what's included in the budget book. You'll see that it starts with an executive summary, followed by a revenue and expenses overview, which includes charts and graphs for easy consumption of information. The operating budget ordinance, we have a draft copy of this ordinance in the budget book. And then we have details for revenues. We have a fund summary, and then all the details by department, other funds, and finally, capital budget, both for fiscal year 23 and the 5-year capital improvement plan. So in closing, this budget is fiscally sound with no tax increase. It includes bold investments to make sure that we are accomplishing the vision set out in the One Chattanooga strategic plan. And with that, I look forward to meeting with you all in the coming weeks to answer questions. And I will turn it back over to Chairwoman Burrs.
Thank you very much. Brent, is this in the front of the book?
The
PowerPoint.
the presentation will be, it should be online now, and it will be emailed to all council members.
Yeah, the PowerPoint, by the way, it was a pleasure working with you on all of this. You did a fabulous job. This PowerPoint is great. And I was just wondering if that's in the front of the book, or will we be getting it?
Yes, ma'am. It'll be emailed to all council members, and it is available on the city's website.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, then I would ask all of my colleagues to spend the next week reviewing the budget, because beginning next week at 10 o'clock in the morning, we're literally going through the book. Brent's preference, and I agree, is we're going to start on the first page and go all the way through it, covering it and answering any questions that you might have, either for you or your constituents. Thank you very much. And with that, I turn it over to you. Hit your light.
Your light.
My light? Okay.
First of all, we have an ECD meeting coming up next. There we go. We have an ECD meeting following with Councilwoman Coonrod. But before we move into that committee meeting, I want to thank you, Dr. Burrs, Brent, your team for a very well done budget presentation, but in construction and working through the budget in a transparent and a very responsible manner. I feel very confident going in this review that we will have the information that we need. And Mr. Mayor, I appreciate you being here. That is a really big deal, I think, to this council. And I know I speak from my position that you are here to stand with your budget. And I appreciate that very much, sir.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, we'll now move into Economic and Development Committee. Councilman Coonrod, you want to just, and I'll take your chair and you can go ahead and I'll just keep getting kicked down the road.
Pass that down.
All right, can we get approval of the minutes? Thank you. Okay, Karen, if you'll read the resolution.
A resolution authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter into a lease agreement with Friends of the Zoo, Inc. in substantially the form attached for lease of the property identified as 301 North Roselaw Avenue on a portion of tax map number 146GA001, the property upon which the zoo is located, for a term of 50 years for the annual rent of $1.
Are you good, Councilwoman Noah? Okay. C, please.
A resolution declaring surplus of the property located at 3303 Creston Circle, further identified as tax map number 146M017.
D.
A resolution approving the acceptance and distribution of fiscal year 2022-2023 Community Development Block Grant and Home Investment Partnership Act funds from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and program income, all totaling approximately $3,048,293, as shown fully herein below.
Thank you. And if you'll read next week's resolution, 7C.
A resolution of intent that the proposed Access Road LLC tax increment financing redevelopment project, also known as the North River Commerce Center Tax Increment Finance Project, will provide necessary improvements to public infrastructure that the city of Chattanooga wants to occur within the proposed time for the project, but does not currently plan to effect in the short term under its existing capital improvement plans. And the city council will consider an economic impact plan prepared and submitted by the City of Chattanooga Industrial Development Board with aid from the City of Chattanooga's Department of Economic Development with respect to the project in accordance with the city's tax increment finance policy and procedures.
Thank you, Karen. Any questions? Ken? Councilwoman Hill, any questions? That's all right. Chip?
Thank you, ma'am. I'm assuming Mr. Freeman's going to give us a presentation on this,
He's next.
so we'll just hold questions till then.
Okay. All right, so Jermaine, if you'll come forward.
Yes.
I'm ready for you.
Good afternoon, members of the City Council. We've got a presentation that should be up here momentarily. All right, so today we're going to talk about tax increment financing. We have an application for tax increment financing that has come before the City of Chattanooga's Industrial Development Board. And that application for tax increment financing, better known as TIF for short, was submitted by Access Road LLC for a project that we're calling the North River Commerce Center. So what is the purpose of tax increment financing? So I thought it would be helpful for the new members of the council and for those who have sort of forgotten the last time we went through a TIF to sort of remind the council of how a TIF works and what it is. TIF, this comes directly from the Tennessee Comptroller's office and website, but TIF is essentially a tool that can be powerful in helping to revitalize blighted, underdeveloped, or underutilized areas by providing revenue that can be used to finance the cost of public and private improvements. For example, if a dilapidated building on a parcel currently generates $30,000 per year in property tax revenue, and there's a proposed new office building to be built on the same parcel, will generate $70,000 in property tax revenue. That increased value, which is also called the increment, is $40,000. When multiplied over 10 years, that's $400,000. This incremental value can be used as part of a TIF for the project because that value is then refunded back to the developer or the applicant for the TIF. This is sort of a graphic image of how a TIF works. So the property taxes that are currently being assessed on the property before it is improved stay in place and they are frozen. And then after a TIF goes into effect, any new property tax revenue that's generated over a specified period of time during the TIF term goes into sort of a fund that is kept and maintained at the Industrial Development Board. And the Industrial Development Board then uses those funds to reimburse the developer for some of those improvements. Please keep in mind that during a TIF, because of the local resolution that was adopted by the Chattanooga City Council, the city will continue to receive funding that goes into the general fund during the entire term of the TIF. So in some cities and jurisdictions, there are TIFs where all of the new increment, all of the new tax revenue is refunded back to the developer. That is not the case here in the city of Chattanooga. In the city of Chattanooga and Hamilton County, there is a portion of the new revenue that is kept and maintained. So the Chattanooga City Council adopted its TIF guidelines back in 2015. So those guidelines are now about 7 years old. These guidelines apply primarily to TIFs that are issued by the Industrial Development Board for economic development projects. Under state law, housing authorities also have the ability to do TIFs, but those are governed differently. And so the resolution that was adopted by City Council back in 2015 specifically applies to TIFs that are initiated through the city's Industrial Development Board. So it is a lengthy application process to apply for a TIF. So a company, a developer, or an organization submits an application to the IDB. Economic development staff review the application. The IDB passes a resolution of intent, which occurred for this particular TIF that we're talking about today. That occurred on the first Monday of May, so last week. The city council then reviews that resolution and passes its own resolution of intent that then allows the applicant to move forward with the preparation of an economic impact plan, which is a document that is required and specified by state law. So under state law, all TIF applications must have an economic impact plan. That document must be structured in a certain way, and it has a very sort of preset layout in terms of how it is structured and what information it's supposed to provide to the state. An application review committee is then selected to review the application process and the economic impact plan, and to determine whether or not to submit the economic impact plan to the city council and the county commission for approval. The application review committee also sets the date for a public hearing at either a regularly scheduled or special scheduled meeting of the IDB. The minutes from that public hearing are then passed along to the city council and county commission for review. And then if approved by the city council and the county commission, pre-approval is something that we also seek in our process. And pre-approval means that after the approval from city council and county commission, we then seek pre-approval from the state comptroller's office before a development and financing agreement finalizes the TIF. These are the 3 existing TIFs that have been done in the city's history. The Black Creek TIF was done under the Littlefield administration. The TIFs for the ML King extension and East Chattanooga Rising were both done under the Burke administration. With the Black Creek and ML King extension TIFs, there was a developer that initiated that TIF, so the developer was the applicant. In the East Chattanooga Rising TIF, the city was the applicant to the Industrial Development Board for improvements that we wanted to see done. So looking forward, the purpose of TIFs is, of course, to spur economic development. And so that is the purpose of why we are here today with an applicant that we are presenting to you. Local TIF guidelines require that TIFs meet the but-for test, meaning that the city was not planning to undertake the improvements that are outlined as part of our own regular budgetary or capital budget process. And then just as a footnote, there is a new provision within the TIF law that allows for the creation of a brownfield TIF on areas that are designated as brownfields, which allow for the development to keep incremental and new property tax and sales tax revenue. So the project that that has come before the Industrial Development Board today really falls in line with the mayor's vision for building a competitive regional economy. The project is described as the North River Commerce Center. It is a $102 million total investment. Today, we are joined by Matt Phillips, who is one of the partners from Access Road LLC, which is the development entity that is applying for this TIF. It is for a proposed $8.7 million, TIF with fees not to exceed $9.9 million. And the project would build 4 buildings totaling 800,000 square feet of Class A industrial space. Class A industrial space is a product that we don't have much of here in Chattanooga. The creation of this space would allow for the city to continue to recruit employers and companies that can create livable wage jobs and bring jobs to the site. We estimate right now that we could see up to 600 full-time jobs that could be located on this site as a result of the construction of these Class A industrial spaces. This would bring much-needed jobs back to the former DuPont site, which at one point in time was a site that employed over 5,000 people. Today, the current footprint of the DuPont site currently employs less than 500. So there is a lot of excess capacity and land in terms of being able to create new industrial space in this area. This would also require some improvements to North Access Road, as well as improvements to existing sanitary, sewer, and stormwater infrastructure. This is what the DuPont site currently looks like today as a result of the fact that there are no longer 5,000 people that come in and out of this site every day. And so this is the way the site has looked now for at least the past 15 years. And this is what Mr. Phillips and his development partners are proposing to bring to the site. So this is what we consider a Class A. This is a mock-up of a Class A industrial building. So we're not talking about warehouses. We're talking about new, modern-looking Class A industrial space that can have multiple uses if needed. This is the site layout for the site. So that existing parking lot that I just showed you in the previous slides, if you look up and you look at the three yellow blocks, probably to the upper left of your screen, those three yellow blocks would be built on that existing parking lot. And then across on the south side of North Access Road in an area that is currently wooded, you would have building 400. That would also provide 200,000 square feet of Class A industrial space. And then please note parcel D, which is the dotted line sort of to the right of your screen. We're going to talk about that here momentarily, but there is not a building currently planned for that parcel. So what is Class A industrial space? This is what it looks like in real life. So this is Grupo Cise. This is a Spanish manufacturer that currently has this building located at Enterprise South Industrial Park, where they manufacture axle components for Volkswagen. This is what the building looks like from the side. This particular building is about 300,000 square feet. And this is what it looks like from the front. So this is an example. This is probably the closest example in Chattanooga of what a Class A industrial product would look like. The proposed community benefit for this project would be the creation of what we are calling the future North Chick Greenway. So if we go back to this particular slide here where we talked about parcel D, that is a long parcel along the Tennessee River. Matt and his partners from Access Road LLC, they have an option to purchase this property as part of this overall TIF district, and they have committed to donating the land that would be necessary to create an easement along the length of this property that could be used to form the future North Chick Greenway. Our staff from our Department of Parks and Outdoors, along with staff from the Trust for Public Land, are currently working to finalize the design and the exact path and layout of where the North Chick Greenway would go. But this would be a big step forward in helping us to have a North Chick Greenway along the Tennessee River on the north side of the river. We also have adjacent parcels that are owned by Corza, which we are in the process of reaching out to for access to their parcel as well. And then there's an adjacent parcel to the west that is owned by the city of Chattanooga, where we could also create an easement for what could be the North Chick Greenway. And so this is a very exciting opportunity for us from the city side because it allows us to create a new multimodal path and access along the river that would provide more green space and the ability for more of our citizens to get outdoors and connect with nature. This is kind of what the parcel looks like right now. So as you walk through it, it is very remote and it's very, very wooded. But as was the case with the Riverwalk and with the South Chick Greenway, this is what the land looks like before you start. And then eventually you can have a nice multimodal pathway. So the resolution that is before you that you will be asked to vote on next week is essentially the resolution that allows the developers and the Industrial Development Board to proceed with the next step in the process. So next week, you are not voting to approve of a TIF. That is not the purpose of next week's vote. Next week, you are simply authorizing the next step in this process to continue because this project, we feel, does meet the but-for test. And there are improvements to public infrastructure that are not currently being planned. And this will allow the preparation of the economic impact plan, which is essential for the state process of seeking a TIF. And so with that, I will take any questions. We also have Charles Wood here from the chamber, as well as, again, Matt Phillips from the development team to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Jermaine. Chairman Lilford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So first questions I always ask when we see a pilot or a TIF is, do we have sufficient callback language?
Yes, we're still working through that. Keep in mind that with a TIF, a TIF, unlike a pilot, doesn't have the same,
Parameters.
sort of the same parameters. And so their ability to draw on the increment is directly based on their ability to build the buildings. Yeah. And so if no buildings get built, there's no increment for them to take advantage of. Yeah.
The second part is it looks like we have qualified the but-for question.
Yes.
Because there are no plans in place.
Correct.
The third point I wanted to bring up is at Planning Commission recently, we have started to see requests for high-end industrial space,
Yes.
rezoning in areas that are not exactly qualified for it.
Sure.
And I think the public is starting to take notice that we have a need
Yes.
for higher-end industrial spaces. So I do think that's worth noting,
Please,
seeing
yes.
that on Planning Commission.
And please note that all of these spaces are currently already zoned M1. So there's no rezoning that would be needed for this project.
Great, great. That's also repurposing, I think is important to note.
Yeah.
You particularly piqued my interest in the Riverwalk, as you know, how much I love our Riverwalk.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there a way to actually put into words a document, a CBA that spells out that in writing?
Yes.
The use of that, and could that be attached to this proposal?
Yes, we are currently in the process of working through our Office of the City Attorney and the attorney for the developers to put in writing an agreement that specifies what their commitment will be for the creation of the easement. They won't build the pathway itself.
Understood.
We will do that, but they will dedicate the property to the city so that we can build it at a future date.
Great, thank you.
And it will be in writing in an agreement.
Thank you.
Yes.
That would be great. I appreciate that. That's all I have right now, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilman Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jermaine, thank you for the presentation. I've been fortunate enough to go over this a number of times leading up to this, being mostly in my district anyways. Devil's in the details, and I know we don't have those yet.
Right.
But at this stage, thank you for going over, reminding people that what a TIF is. I think there's only 3 of us up here that have had to
That's right.
deal with a really, really, really difficult one, which made
Yes.
everyone after it extremely hard.
Yes.
So the way we've come a long way, and I appreciate all the hard work I know that you've put in for years
Yep.
on these things so that they can truly be used for their intent for our community.
Yes, sir.
I am very excited about this project. Mr. Phillips, I can't thank you enough for looking at us to do a project of this size here in Chattanooga and in this area. We've needed it for a very long time, not just the city for the space, but also that area of the community that's been kind of dead and overlooked. So thank you very much for your willingness to invest in our community. And I'm definitely looking forward to taking the next steps here, Jermaine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman.
Councilman Henderson.
Thank you, ma'am. Jermaine, how many, I think we had 3 or 4 active TIFs,
We currently have 3.
3.
Yes, sir.
And the Black Creek TIF, what was the term on it?
I believe that was a 10-year term, but I will double check to be sure.
And when does the 10-year start? Because it was initially approved in 2012.
Right. I believe that the clock started for the Black Creek TIF in 2013, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
so
when-
it actually should be expired at this point then, or coming up for expiration next year. Yeah.
Okay. And when will this one kick in?
Well, that still sort of is
Yep.
in negotiation, so we haven't determined that yet. But in theory, the simplest way of sort of determining the start date would be the very next year after the year that they apply, because essentially the base taxes would be frozen in this year, and the TIF would start in the following year.
So it would not be on completion of build out.
It could be. That is also something that can be negotiated and something that we can negotiate.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilwoman Hill.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Jermaine, please talk with us about the overall boundary of the TIF. What you and I had discussed is not the same as these specific parcels.
Right. So those specific parcels just compose the project area because that's where the primary project is that they are planning to undertake. We have drawn a larger boundary to capture additional increment just in case there is future development that could be used to also fund the TIF and to also make public improvements. So, for example, by drawing a larger TIF district that includes, for example, the property that the city owns, where currently the soccer fields are, we could use potentially any excess TIF increment funds to pay for construction of the North Chick Greenway through that parcel as well, because that would be an eligible public use. So there's usually always a larger plan area that is typically bigger than the project area itself. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Can you clarify for me, when we vote on this particular project
Yes.
and recommending it to the IDB for consideration, at what point is the TIF boundary finalized?
So the TIF boundary would be finalized in the economic impact plan. So when they prepare the economic impact plan, it will clearly state what the project parcels are and what the plan area parcels are. And that economic impact plan would then come back before the city council and the county commission for a final vote.
Okay, that's great. I too am very pleased about the potential for this project. I've met with Matt and his team, and I think it's a tremendous way to reactivate this area and bring some quality jobs into District 2 and into District 3. So as a child of a DuPont engineer, I'm really excited to see this this site become something that really adds to the vitality of our community again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilwoman Hill. If I may, Madam Chair, Mr. Phillips, I believe, also has some connections to DuPont. Would it be okay if he came up and spoke for just a second and introduced himself?
Sure, we got one more question.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Councilman Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jermaine, just to piggyback on Councilwoman Hill, talking about the boundary,
Yes.
when it does come back to us for a vote that does include the boundary,
Yes.
should we choose not to accept the boundary because I'm not sold on the boundary?
Yes.
Just to be honest.
Okay.
I'm not comfortable with some of the areas that are also being included potentially. That's why I said the devil's in the details.
Sure.
But just to be clear, when that comes back, if we as a council choose to change the boundaries being proposed, does
Mhm.
that need to go back to the IDB? Does it need to go back to the entire process? Because if so, I'd like to have that conversation before
Yes.
it goes to the IDB so that we're not spinning our wheels. I want this project to get going sooner than
Right.
later.
Sure.
But just to let you know, I would like consideration of the boundary by this council prior to the IDB step if it has to go back to them.
My preference, in order to keep us from starting the process over, would be for me, you, and Charles Wood and Councilwoman Hill to have a conversation about what that boundary should look like, because we should resolve that before it goes any further.
I would totally agree, which is why I'm bringing it up now. So
Yes, sir.
thank you, Councilwoman, for bringing that up so that we could clarify that point, because that was one of the details I was concerned about.
Yes, sir. Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilman Smith. Mr. Phillip?
Yeah, I'll invite Mr. Matt Phillips up.
Thank you and good afternoon. My name's Matt Phillips. I am the president of Access Road LLC. I'm also the president of Rise Partners. Rise Partners is a commercial real estate services company. We do property management and leasing. Access Road LLC is the applicant, as Jermaine mentioned, will be the developer on the project. Just as Councilwoman Hill, I also have DuPont roots and Hickson roots. I'm a Chattanooga native, and my in-laws live on Big Ridge. My mom lives in Hickson. We live in North Chattanooga. My kids play soccer at North River Soccer Complex, which I was joking with Mark Harrison, that he might have got a little bit of a nod when we named the project, because we're playing off the soccer fields across the street. We're really excited to see this project move forward. My grandparents retired from DuPont. I can think back to sitting in that parking lot during shift change and waiting for either my grandfather or my grandmother to come out and take them to lunch, and now that parking lot's empty for the most part. What used to have 5,000 to 6,000 employees, now 200 to 300 with Cordsa. What many people don't know is when DuPont sold to Invista, a Koch brothers company, Invista operated the entire plant and all the property around it for a period of time, and then they sold to Cordsa, a Turkish company that continues to make nylon for tires, the automotive industry. When Cordsa purchased the property, they did not purchase 88 acres surrounding the property. The empty parking lot is not owned by Cordsa. It's owned by Invista, the former operator of the plant. The ball fields that are now grown over with kudzu are not owned by Cordsa. They're owned by Invista. The walking trail that's out in front of Cordsa is owned by Invista. And then the land across the street, just down from the water treatment facility, south of Access Road, is owned by Invista. And that's what we have an option to purchase. And so that's, we seen the need for Class A industrial product here, and seeing what's happening in our peer cities in the Southeast, and seeing the need for Chattanooga to remain competitive. And the World of Economic Development came up with the idea to do a new sort of public-private industrial park that allows us to do up to 800,000 to 900,000 square feet of Class A industrial. And it's really going to require a public-private partnership, because the amount of public infrastructure improvements that are needed to make it happen. So I really appreciate your words, Councilman Smith and Councilwoman Hill. We're very excited about this project, excited about the jobs that'll be created, excited about the rebirth of what was once a pillar of the community in DuPont. So with that, I have at some point in time, I'm sure I'll get the opportunity to do a presentation with pretty pictures and all that sort of thing, but I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Any additional questions? We're good here. Thank you for investing in Chattanooga.
Thank you so much.
Yep, so we'll close out economic development and legislative, turn it over to Councilman.
This is really easy.
I'm gonna win the most chairs today.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair, for turning it over. We will open our legislative committee meeting. Have a motion to approve the last minutes. A motion and a second. All in favor, aye. Opposed, nay. Thank you. It's been a while. So today we've got one item to discuss, honorary street name resolution. I hope everybody has had an opportunity to review the documentation that was sent out, I believe, towards the end of last week, to get an idea of what is being proposed here, or at least proposed for discussion. At this time, the author of the resolution would like to turn it over to her to explain kind of her thoughts on it, and then we'll start taking questions. Councilwoman Dolly.
Thank you so much. I did send out information regarding two things regarding honorary street names. The first is a resolution. Well, the first was a resolution to rescind resolution number 24815, which outlined the policy of not naming street names or facilities for individuals until they are deceased. And then the second document you should have received was the original city ordinance about street names, as well as proposed changes or updates to that ordinance. I would like to open it up for a discussion to see if this council would like to move forward with any of those changes. Just so y'all are aware, I did discuss this with a few community members. Their concerns were mimicked Councilman Henderson's concern. How do we determine who is honorable and notable? Who's more deserving than others? What if someone wants to name a street after someone who's controversial? So those were the concerns that I received from various community members, echoing those sentiments of Councilman Henderson. So I would like to open this up for discussion and to see if we would like to move forward with this. So any discussion or anything anyone would like to share?
Good, Councilwoman.
Yes.
Chairman Ledford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Over the weekend, I had several conversations with neighbors in my neighborhood and then across the district when I was talking about some zoning items, and brought this conversation up too. And kind of the same questions were brought forth. And it was the first question. They said, "Why? Is there a need for this change? Did something change that really we should overturn this kind of standing rule here?" And I think the conversations that were brought up were legitimate, and it was points of similar context. So I just want to lend that to the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Councilwoman Coonrod.
Thank you, Chair. I too, in conversations with community members, share the same concern and have the same, reflective questions. And really they were concerned about, what if somebody say, hey, let's honor a specific gang member or so, or those things will create, additional problems because people feel like, whoever they feel like is honorable enough to get a street change, they're going to want that done. But I think for this sake, well, Ms. Paula been champion for from the Bessie. This isn't the first time this resolution has been mentioned to change the names, but for the sake of Kane Brown, I would ultimately like to see him be recognized in a different way, not just, for a street, changing the name of a street that does no justice. Here's somebody who, for the past 5 years, who's been a famous country music singer, who came and performed. I had never heard about him until I heard that he was coming to Chattanooga to do a concert. Now we're saying we want to change an ordinance to benefit him to get a name change. Yes, he have contributed through way of Lowe's to help improve the Boys and Girls Club, as well as giving them $100,000 to the Boys and Girls Club of America, not specifically to the East Lake. He hasn't contributed anything to our YFD sites or anything like that. But I think that, and there's other people that are famous from Chattanooga that hadn't been recognized at all that are still living. And I get I understand the why behind it is that we're hopeful that people that are famous, that are from Chattanooga, that they're going to come back and say, hey, we're going to do something from the city that I'm from. I mean, it could be possible that they would do that, but I don't think that we should recognize, it shouldn't take somebody getting a street named after them for them to be proactive or want to come back and improve an area within their community where they're from. We shouldn't have to do that, right? And if you rich and famous and you from Chattanooga, you should be willing to. It shouldn't take a name change, because I could think of a lot of people who are passionate, who love their city, that does stuff and we don't recognize them. We don't give them a handshake. And they're doing things in our city that impact people's lives in a different perspective. When we think about the council members that serve, we're not saying, let's name a street in Lookout Valley over Chip, because I watched this man for, throughout history, over the years, work hard with his hands with a group of people coming in and fixing up housing that's in deplorable conditions. When I think about changing the name of the street, I think about actions like that, not because you made it to the famous stage and it's, oh, we want to recognize you. So this is not something that I'm in support of. But again, I'm just one person, one voice on council, but just wanted to lend my thoughts to the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Henderson, I hope you're not volunteering to be a victim here so we can name something after you. I'd like to keep you around for a while.
You don't have to worry about naming anything for me, sir. Before we take a fence down, I always like to know why it was erected first. And I've not heard anything from the administration or from the Department of Transportation as to why we have this in place. Now, I can draw some conclusions and think, well, and as I said last week or week before, whenever it was, I would like to make sure that a person ends well before we decide to honor them. And, you know, some of the thoughts that I had this past week is, what if we choose to honor someone living and then something happens that brings dishonor to their name? Do we leave it to another council to try to clean up our mess and remove that street sign or that building name, or, you know, are we having to leave it to someone else now to sort of clean up? Or do we include it in the ordinance? But then I guess you have to determine what dishonor might be. I think this provision is in place for a good reason. And I haven't been persuaded that there's a good enough reason to change it at this point. I think there are many ways, as Councilwoman Coonrod said earlier, I think there are many ways that we can honor a person that is not as permanent and possibly would not have to be undone without, you know, going through changing this. And I hope that this situation isn't brought on just by this one particular instance. There should be a reason, a good reason to change a ordinance or resolution, a policy. And at this point, I've really not heard a good reason to change the way that we've been doing it. Thank you, sir. That's all I've got.
All right. Thank you, Councilman. I see no further lights at this time, so I'm just going to also echo my colleagues. I've had a number of conversations, a lot of the same feedback. I did do a little bit of digging sort of way back when, and there were some discussions around the same type of concerns that were raised by this council. And the main one was around who gets to determine who should have something named after them. And that was just something that at the time, government bodies, they didn't want to have to be the ones to make those kinds of decisions. So it was, this was put into place to really prevent that as well, is what I understood from some of those conversations. So just to echo a lot of what my colleagues have said. So with that, Councilwoman Dotley, I do see your light. Do you have another comment, or are you ready for me to ask if the council would like to see this legislation move forward, or would you like to address that, ma'am?
I would like to address that with the notes that I received from my community members, as well as the notes we just got from the council. I would like to go ahead and pull the legislation.
All right, very well then. Thank you. Are there any further comments based on the author of the legislation wishing to withdraw it and not have it heard by the council? There's no action that needs to be taken at this time. Are there any further questions, comments, anything further for Legislative Committee? All right, seeing none, we will adjourn Legislative and go to Planning and Zoning Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
All right, let's get started on our planning and zoning. Can I get a motion on the minutes? Thank you. Today's committee is focused on the accessory dwelling unit ordinance that we received last week. I hope that you all have had some time to consider the content of that and have some questions. So I think we've got Chris here, and Chris could probably answer any questions folks have. Does anybody have anything they want to say?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Karen Rennick from the RPA is going to do a brief presentation.
Okay, great.
There's a presentation with some slides. I think we had 5 questions last week, and we took some time just to talk through those, and we have some answers today on those. And there should be another presentation that starts with a gray cover slide. Yes, thank you. And I'm going to skip to the end. We can reference the other language. So one of the questions was, pardon me, size of the unit. Should we consider 1,000 square foot maximum? And Dallas Rucker spoke to this briefly at the end and noted, so I'll kind of remind you of what he said, is that the 700 square foot requirement under local building code only requires one entrance, when the 1,000 square foot unit would require 2 exits. So an example there would be a 1,000 square foot second floor ADU may require 2 exterior staircases. Also noting that the ADU is intended to be an accessory structure, that 700 square foot size helps reinforce that. And other communities have multiple ways of determining the appropriate size of an ADU. Some do a sliding scale based on the size of the lot, the size of the primary unit. And so we were trying to keep it a little bit more simple and came up with that 700 square feet. So any changes, certainly, we could, provide and make those in the ordinance, but this is just providing you information to the questions you have. And then any guidance you have or additional research or questions you might have, we're certainly happy to address. So I'll go through them, Councilwoman Hill, unless you'd like to take questions one at a time.
We can go ahead.
Okay. The second question, could single-wide manufactured homes be used as an ADU? I kind of punted on that because I remembered we discussed it but didn't have a final answer. A single-wide manufactured home would only be allowed as an ADU when located in the R5 zone where this type of housing is permitted. There are very few R5 zones in the city of Chattanooga. So while it would be possible, yes, but there's also the requirement in the ordinance of a permanent foundation. We feel that most single-wide manufactured homes would not meet that requirement of a permanent foundation. So while the answer is yes, it is between the permanent foundation and the zone, there would be very few opportunities, we feel, for that to happen. The third question is, could you just subdivide a lot with an ADU? And there was some discussion about, would the city be aware if that happened? We do think that through the subdivision process, the staff-approved subdivision process, we would know that was happening. But if you have a primary ADU and a detached ADU on your lot, you could conceivably, if you had street frontage, lot size, and can meet your setbacks, you could possibly subdivide that, and your ADU, what was an ADU, could become a primary unit. We discussed that as staff. We don't see that there's any problem with that. You have a residential unit that meets full code requirements. So that would just bring another housing unit onto the market. It would go from an ADU accessory unit to a primary unit. So it would have to meet all the requirements of a subdivision plat, but that review is pretty thorough process. That was a really good question, because when I answered before, I was thinking about whether we would catch it, but yes, it could be subdivided and become a primary unit. The next question was, could a one-story home have a second-story ADU? The current ordinance basically says the height cannot exceed the height of the primary unit. So we noted that the existing language would allow for a one-story home to have an attached ADU or have a one-story detached ADU. But it's correct in that the current requirements would not allow a two-story detached ADU. So we have kind of attached and detached. So, and if here giving like 3 examples, 2 of them would be allowed, but 1 would not be allowed. And we discussed it as staff and just noted that we really don't have a health safety reason for the maximum height requirement. Form-based code has 24 feet, and I think the language in the code says or 2 stories maximum. Dallas recommended we go and 2 stories maximum. So there is precedent for a greater height for an ADU. We're just hesitant that this could look out of place throughout the city. But we note that, if there is council would desire to have greater height, perhaps one option is only to allow it in the backyard and not allowed in the side yard. And also just note that this also could be part of a one-year review. So again, trying to provide information, there is height for ADU is precedent in the form-based code, but we just went with we felt it might be more compatible integrating into the wide variety of communities we're hoping to see these. And last was a question, we had some discussion about design standards. As you remember, there's language in the ordinance that requires is kind of some language about architectural compatibility and speaking about materials. And there was some discussion about, the administration had asked that section be removed, feeling that that would be an additional hardship if an applicant had to provide, a lot of information about that. Also, we noted that that might be difficult to enforce and it's not required of single family homes. So Chris Anderson did some work on this and we have suggested language on the slide if Chris would like to speak to that.
Thank you, Karen. Currently in the review process for single-family detached homes, there's not necessarily an architectural review. If that was the case, our longer than we wish permitting times would be significantly increased, as would our cost of staff. So the way this is worded is ADUs must follow all design standards applicable to single-family detached houses. And this would be anything that's found in the building code, anything in the International Residential Code is adopted by this body in the city, but would not apply a different additional layer of review of a design review process. We do not intend to create basically a citywide historic zoning commission bureaucracy where this would have to go, nor do we think it would be wise to house this responsibility in a new staff hire when other new staff hires are needed for more pressing and urgent matters. So we would hope that this is the version that makes it into the final tonight. I'll be happy to take any questions about this now.
All right, we're lit up on the board over here. All right, Mr. Ledford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So obviously design standards, you looked at me the whole time, Chris, so.
Not true, Chairman. I also looked at Councilwoman Burrs.
Yes, I know. So this past week I did some review and I actually went and dug around in form-based code and there really isn't any design standards per se. I think what we have seen in form-based code is a building of a complementary type structure because you're building it all at once. We obviously have a different situation here. So what my concern was, and it was back in 2018, was that that quality was built and that these were actually treated so that your neighbors, when they looked across, said, hey, that looks very nice in your backyard. And then doing research, and you made a good point, we don't actually require that in the actual building of a house. So I kind of took a couple steps back. The language that you have here is probably across the board for what we do for single family homes and and the whole building process. So to apply layers of design, I don't want to do that as well because that would increase obviously time. And if someone had a brick home and they wanted to build an ADU out of hardy board, I'm certainly not going to say, well, you have to build it with brick. I mean, then the whole idea of an ADU becomes, I think, a little, defeats the purpose. Going back to the 700 and 1,000 square feet, appreciate what staff did on that. That second entrance really kind of drives home to me. Sitting on planning commission for so long, I understand the complexity that comes with that and how you configure that. And then adding that second staircase. And I think the public, and from what I've heard so far, in my district and mostly my house from my wife is very wise counsel. And that is, are you building a second home in the backyard or are you building an ADU? I mean, what's the actual, let me drill down to the purpose. So I can see where they I can see where they recommended the 700 square feet. So I would suggest, though, that we have a height question out there. We have a suggested language on design standards. We do still have the 700 versus 1,000 square foot. It would be nice to have in my humble opinion, to have another week to maybe chew on this and also get some input from our districts, because I had several questions, especially on the manufactured, being able to pull in something with an axle. And I think some of those questions are still lingering out there because this is a big move. This is bold. And I would feel more comfortable if it wasn't, well, I would feel more comfortable if we had a week to chew on some of these items that were presented to us so that we could take them and make much more intelligent decisions based on the information presented to us today.
Thank you, Chairman. As you know, Mayor Kelly is a fan of big, bold moves, and that's what we're doing in housing, as you correctly called it. I think we're fine to wait another week if that would aid council in getting some of their questions answered. And I believe there are at least a couple of you who may have an additional amendment you'd like to offer. It's not our intention to rush this. This is a big deal, and it's going to help a lot of people. It's not going to hurt it to be delayed 7 days. I think we're fine, and I'd be happy to take meetings with any of you in the meantime this week so we can work out your amendments and I can help you craft those as well.
Sure. And that's obviously for council to decide because chair doesn't make a motion, but
Right.
I just trying to find the best path for open communication and information. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Thank
Madam
you.
Chair.
Councilman Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hey, Chris, forgive me if I missed this, and I don't know if it was previous conversations or even a light touch on tonight. What was the outcome of discussions around HOA rules prohibiting ADUs and then design standards as well? I know when we did STVRs, we weren't overriding an HOA's ability to prohibit them if they were in one of those areas. Do we have language, and this is just confirmation, but do we have language in this as well that follows that same suit as STVRs?
Yes, sir, Councilman. That's an excellent question. And this ordinance does not override any deed restrictions, HOA covenants, or any other rules that are similar that would prevent the creation of ADUs. HOAs are able to restrict these if they choose.
Great. And would that apply to the design standards as well? If an HOA said no yellow houses?
Any design standards currently in effect or in the future in effect by an HOA that are legal would continue to be legal and would not be affected by this ordinance at all. I cannot speak to whether or not HOAs can apply certain design standards, but there's nothing in this that would prevent them from doing that.
That's all I needed to know. Thank you, sir. Appreciate
Thank
it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Councilwoman Burrs.
Thank you. Couple of questions. Let me make sure I've got this clear. You're talking about an ADU being no larger than either the 700 or the 1,000 feet, right? 700, right?
700 is currently written in the ordinance. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I'm still a bit, one comment, and then I have a question. When you were talking about short-term vacation rentals, it makes sense to review in a year because they're not permanent. They're business licenses. You're talking about building houses, and if we haven't gotten it right, we can't ask people to tear them down. It's just something to think about. We're stuck with if we got this wrong, and where I'm coming from is, at least in my district, there's lack of trust because of the short-term vacation rental stuff that happened. It was supposed to be a panacea, and that didn't happen happily. And mine is a district that doesn't even allow short-term vacation rentals, but they're there. So which brings me to bring the one about where you could subdivide lots. Okay. And I think that was my original question. So I have to have a certain size lot, number one.
Yes, ma'am.
Right? And then it can be subdivided and it can have 2 ADUs on it, right?
It could, but I think the important takeaway from this slide is that there's nothing that the presence or not of an ADU does that makes you more able or less able to divide a lot. The subdivision rules are the subdivision rules. If you put an ADU on part of a lot and subdivide it later, it's just because that lot was big enough in the first place to
In the first
subdivide.
place, okay.
Yes. There's no additional subdivision power that comes with this ordinance.
All right, so I could put it in my backyard and then I could decide to move from my own home and I'd have 2 essentially rental properties.
Well, surprisingly, I've never been invited to your backyard, so I don't know how big it is. But if it was big enough to
It can happen.
to
Where I'm
meet
going with
the
this-
minimum lot size, yes, ma'am.
All right, where I'm going with this, Chris, is I'm looking at all the things that I've learned from the short-term vacation rental
Yes.
thing, and that's the purpose of my questions. We absolutely need affordable housing, and I'm not against ADUs at all. I would just like us to spend enough time thinking about it ahead of time so we don't have the fiasco that apparently we're dealing with now with some unhappy people.
May I answer that just
Yeah.
briefly? Just so the council is aware, this ordinance was actually drafted by a staff member in the RPA 2 years ago, and it was not pursued by the previous administration. It came
I
to
remember
our
it.
attention last year after we took office. We've had multiple community meetings, well, not community meetings, multiple meetings with stakeholders, multiple internal meetings. We've looked at ordinances from other cities. The staff has put many, many hours into this over 2 years. So I don't want anyone to think that we are rushing into this. Hence, it's not a big deal to take another week. But we are happy to take another week if you have things you want to fine tune on it. But there's been a lot of time spent on it over the last
I have
2
the
years.
old one, and you're right. There was a tremendous packet that went forward, and I'm not being critical of that. What concerns me is we're applying a one-size-fits-all across the city, and I'm not sure the districts don't differ where there might be some unique problems. And where I'm coming from in my district, the homes are old. There's some very big lots there. Nobody wants a PUD there. And so I'm trying to figure out how it's a win-win, because I'm not sure that one size fits all. I think we should go forward with it. However, I think we should think carefully about just putting it across the city when we've got some real issues that we haven't addressed in different configurations of land. And that's where I'm coming from. Things we've addressed, like in Darren's area, I was the person that put the chickens that we've indulged, that had the property that somehow it got subdivided. Yeah. Nobody had ill intent. It's that there are different sections of town that are more closer, some that have a lot of potential for garage apartments. And then there's some people who their property will be totally unprotected from the larger properties next door that really could put 3 or 4 of these things on there.
Well,
And
no, ma'am,
that's
they
what
can
I'm
only put
trying-
one.
Well, if it's subdivided, maybe not.
Yes,
I mean,
ma'am.
I'm hearing you.
Right, but the ADU ordinance would have nothing to do with the ability to subdivide a lot. That was the point of this slide. The two things were not related.
Okay. And rules are only for people who follow them, or they're for people who don't. And so it forces people to take people to court. Their civil actions, because we're not going to enforce it, because that's not our purview. We're trying not to be police. We're trying to get more housing. I would like to talk more about it. I'm with Darren. I'm absolutely for ADUs. I'm absolutely sure we need affordable housing. I'm not absolutely sure that it needs to look the same across all Chattanooga. Thank God Chattanooga's different in many ways, and people choose to live different places in different ways. And I have them, by the way, in my neighborhood. I have some great ones in my neighborhood. It was the neighborhood getting together and working with people, and it didn't make enemies out of people. And they're very successful, and they do add to housing, and everybody likes them. It's this across the board law ordinance that I think might get folks who don't behave in good taste all the time. That's my only concern. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Chair.
Councilman Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilwoman Burrs, one thing I've learned in passing ordinance up here, no matter how well it's written, somebody's going to abuse it. That's just the facts of life. And I certainly am for ADUs. I've got two concerns. One, and I love, when we're talking about the size of it, the 700 versus 1,000. Karen, you mentioned some cities have a sliding scale rule. I think sometimes we envision these ADUs going on a flat level lot, on a half acre, and they're all the same. And kind of to Councilwoman Burrs's point, we've got a lot of variation in Chattanooga, and probably what we're thinking where these ADUs will go or anything but that. So I like the sliding scale. I don't know how difficult that is to enforce. If we're saying somebody that's got 8,000 square foot house, they can only have a 700 square foot house, a 700 square foot ADU, the same as somebody's got a 1,200 square foot house. I mean, to me, they don't go together. Whereas if you're on some kind of sliding scale, if we do a minimum, obviously there's a minimum and then a maximum within this sliding scale. I kind of like that idea. The other one is the height. I'm really concerned that in much of our neighborhoods that would like to see ADUs, they're single story houses. Mm-hmm. But to limit them to not being able to provide a garage apartment. And I'm thinking of parking on the bottom mm-hmm. and a dwelling on the top. Somehow, I don't know if we address the height of the way that thing looks by saying it has to be what we call a story and a half, where the room is framed up within the roof so that it doesn't look like a two-story. But I think somehow we need to accommodate the places in Chattanooga that would like to see the ADUs, but they're single-story houses that could benefit from a garage apartment style ADU. I mean, I would really like to see that in this ordinance. I'm happy to talk offline to see how we can come up with that, but
okay.
Sorry. Councilman, I was almost called you chairman. Sorry, Councilman.
Please don't call me.
Yeah. I'd be happy to sit with you and this week and work up an amendment for you to present to the council if you'd like.
Yeah.
Allowing, say, my recommendation would be if you want to go down this road, say, just place the 24-foot or two-story cap regardless of the height of the primary structure. We can work on that together this week if you like.
I thought I saw Dallas here. Do we typically measure from the, like I said, these, our lots are not flat and level around here. They're all on a slope. Where do we get our height measurement from? The front door entrance, wherever that may be?
There's a whole diagram for how they measure where the base is.
I forget. I mean, I ought to know, but.
Building code definition is the average grade around all four sides. Yeah. But the zoning is looking at the height from the street itself. If it's right up on the street, if you're in a form-based code that requires you to build up, or it's a couple of feet off the street, you use the curve edge as your grade. But if you're above the road, you're still.
Well, all these ADUs are going to be behind the houses, so they're not going to be on the road.
They should, but it would still be. I mean, the grade would still be where we consider the front of the lot, which is the the front of the lot has to be on the street, the open right of way or street. So we would use that even though it was in the back, and then we would look at the grade in the front of the house, usually 6 feet out, so somebody doesn't mound dirt up against it or dig in against.
Yeah.
That we pull that out of the building code, because that's what the building code says, to keep people from mounting dirt right against the building to do something.
Builders wouldn't do that.
When you're trying to get that extra
Not you, sir.
foot, you know, you're at the zoning board of appeals, you're put too high. You know,
Yeah.
You're trying to figure out anything, and most of the time it's an honest mistake, but that is how we look at the front grade as far as zoning.
Average across the front, okay.
And that's different. Commercially, we use the building code definition of the height of the building.
Well, I'm just really referring how it would refer to the ADUs.
Yes, sir. I would think unless we put something special, the general requirements would what we would use to determine the height.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And Councilman, for that, we can, the LDO really does have a one pager that they give to builders who have questions about how they calculate, well, what's the base, what's the ground level? How do you calculate height from what point? We could do that for ADUs as well. And just have that as an internal policy document that it wouldn't need to be a part of this ordinance. It's just, we can just mirror what we use for single family detached houses that show what Dallas just described.
Okay.
And just so you know, most will be behind the house. There are some areas of town, Midtown certainly one of them, that has unusually wide, shallow lots. So that there will be some, I'm sure, that take advantage of this for a side yard ADU, but they're very few and far between. I'd say probably less than 5 or 10%.
Yeah, well, there again, like I said, we have a vision of what these are going to look like, but we've got so much variety in our building lots and slopes and sizes that, one size is not going to fit all, but.
Certainly not. And we find that one size house doesn't fit all either. And usually the builder, certainly if they're a homeowner, they have an interest in building the best quality item on the land that they own.
That's true.
To add to the height conversation, I would be in favor of an amendment, Councilman, if you were to bring that to add to the height because of garage apartments. However, as Dallas is describing the way that the height of a building would be calculated, I'm thinking about many of the residents of North Chattanooga who live in older bungalows that are sitting perched on a hill and then are accessed by an alley. And that's where their garage apartment sits, or their garage sits, and would then have an ADU potentially on top of that. I'm hearing Councilwoman Dotley go, and that makes me think about some of those hills in St. Elmo also. So I think we need to take that into consideration. It may need to be more of a from the ground to the roof to really be able to be useful for people.
Councilwoman or Madam Chair, we will work on that this week, and I can provide updates to the three of you who have the hilliest districts, which would be, apologies to Councilman Smith, Councilman Henderson, yourself, and Councilwoman Dotley. I can provide those updates as well.
All right. Mr. Henderson, do you have anything else? You're good. Councilwoman Coonrod.
Thank you, Chair. Chris Anderson, I got a few hills in District 9 too now, so make
It's
sure
true.
you-
She's on that. She's got that
Hey,
ridge.
put
We
me
all
on
have
down.
hills.
I'm most definitely down for the conversation about height,
Apologies, I'll include you as well.
Yes, so you can send that out, but I just want to say, I'm really appreciative of you all's bold move for housing. We've been discussing this ADU process for quite some time, so it just didn't just appear magically now. But I really appreciate y'all picking it up and really understanding the need for housing, all housing types, right? And when you think we say ADUs, and then we're like, oh well, okay, well in my neighborhood, in this neighborhood, but really, when you drive through the city of Chattanooga, there's all kind of ADUs happening. So in my area, we may say it's an ADU. I may drive out the North Chat, it's a granny suite or an in-law suite or a carriage house, East Brainerd guest house. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So we give it different terms, and the more upscale the community is, the more scale of what you're going to call it. It's going to be more prestigious and acceptable in those communities. So I think that sometimes we get in our own way when we say that we're for something, but then we're actually halting things, and that prevents things from happening. It creates barriers and different obstacles that we got to continue to go over just to get it done, which the end result is we need more housing. Not just affordable housing, but all kind of level housing, income levels, you know what I mean? So ADUs create that opportunities for entry level, for, when I become an empty nester, you know what I mean, or whoever, you may get that opportunity to make additional income, like, offset bills or anything. Like, you just never know what happens in your stage of life that you may need some additional balance to go with what you already have. So I'm really excited about it. I'm looking forward to it getting on the agenda, hopefully that, we won't procrastinate it too much longer, so we can get it moving forward and houses could be built that's more affordable for people. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Mayor Kelly knows that there's no bigger problem than affordable housing in Chattanooga. And we know that there's not one magic bullet that's going to magically solve everything, but there are different ordinances and different solutions that solve parts of the problem. We really believe this is going to solve part of the problem.
Thought, I think, before we close out, and that is, I want to underscore, I don't think anybody in the press is here. This topic for us. This is a couple of years of research. So when it's reported that we took action in some form, I want to make sure that you tell everybody out there, this is not a new concept. Number one. Two, we already have this in some sort of a fashion. I'm going to put on my planning commission hat here. If I can steal it from you, Chairwoman, just for a moment.
Sure.
If you build a similar structure and you attach it to your house, that is already legal. Okay? That's already legal. And that has been a problem that I've had to deal with in District 4 after the tornado. Was folks were rebuilding and they said now is an opportunity to build that accessory dwelling unit for ailing parents, kids, whatever the situation may arise. Well, you can't do it unless you connect it via a walkway or some odd, and you should see it. There's examples of this on Gray Road where these long roof lines are connecting two structures. Well, that's okay. We'll just take that roof line away and we're already doing it. We're already doing it. So I just wanted to make that a point before we close the session out. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, it looks like everybody's lights are cleared. I do have a question about utilities. A couple different wise folks from my district have brought up the question about how utilities will be handled. The ordinance as it's written is silent on that. Or I guess not an ordinance, but.
Can you elaborate, Madam Chair, on
So would an ADU be required to dig a new sewer line rather than attach it to the existing one? And, have we had our building folks take a look at that?
So I will kill time while Dallas Rucker makes his way up here to the podium and say that it would be unusual for us to put information about utilities in Chapter 38 in the zoning code in this ordinance, but we do have other ordinances that speak to when a new sewer line is required. EPB has rules about when power meters are required and when they're not. And I'm now going to turn it over to Dallas Rucker, who has had time to get up here next to me.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. They would not be required to put in a separate sewer line as long as those two houses remain on the same piece of property. If the piece of land was large enough and a subdivision ever occurred, they would have to separate those sewers at that time.
Okay.
But this will just be another one on there. The difference now, if you connect it through the breezeway, we do not let you have a second meter because it's part of the house. We want it to all operate as a single unit. We'd really want these on a separate meter, and I'm sure the owners would as well, just for separation of utility costs.
So are you saying that these would be required to be on a separate electricity and water meter?
No, they
That
wouldn't
would be the
necessarily be
choice of the
required, but
homeowner.
I would think most of them would. 700 square feet is probably pretty large. Most houses don't oversize their service. So they're either going to have to spend the money upgrading their service and run an underground line or running
But that's the
running
choice
another
of the
a drop.
homeowner.
That would be the
Okay.
choice
Okay.
of the property owner.
All right. So as we think, thank you very much. So as we think about moving forward, we've had a recommendation to give this a week. Do I have any other consensus on that? Does anybody else have a need to hold this for another week before we think about putting it on the agenda? It's on the agenda tonight. Sorry, I was in meetings for like 12 hours yesterday. I mean, and I'm switching to digital. So, okay. Does anybody want to hold it? Yes, you'd like to? Oh, I'm sorry. Learning. Okay. Holding it a week?
I think as Mr. Chair asked, only to get answers that we've asked.
Okay. Anybody have any problem with that? No. Okay. Do I need to hold a vote on that?
We'll need to take an action this evening.
This
It's on the
evening.
agenda.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay. Well, does anybody else have anything related to planning and zoning you want to talk about? Okay. We're going to adjourn and move into attorney-client. Thank you all.
I got 2 slides which shows, and I did, which shows like all the